Welcome to my channel. I am Ben. Today, we step into a chilling truth. Children who crossed the line between innocence and brutality. Children who committed acts of violence so disturbing that even adults could not fathom them. Picture this: a quiet, suburban neighborhood, the hum of crickets at dusk, and behind one closed door, a boy not yet 13 sharpening a knife. Or imagine the echo of laughter on a playground, where one child watches another with a stare far colder than any child should bear. These are not scenes from fiction. They are snapshots from American history. When we hear the word killer, we think of hardened criminals, adults shaped by years of bitterness or rage. But what happens when the face of the perpetrator is still round with youth, when their voice has not yet broken, when they still sit in middle school classrooms? The contradiction unsettles us. The innocence of childhood colliding with the darkness of murder. In this episode, we will uncover 5 of the youngest offenders in the United States, each under 15 years old when they struck. Their crimes are not just about statistics or trials. They are about broken families, stunned communities, and a justice system forced to confront the unimaginable. Why did these children kill? Was it anger, neglect, trauma, or something deeper? A glimpse into a psyche already fractured beyond repair. And what does it say about society when childhood itself is no longer a barrier against horror? Stay with me, because as we open the files of these young killers, what we find will not only disturb you, it will force us to ask how thin the boundary really is between innocence and atrocity. Before we open the individual cases, it is important to understand how this list was shaped. These are not random stories of troubled youth. They are tragedies selected with clear criteria to show both the extremes of violence and the profound questions they leave behind. First, age. Every perpetrator in this list was under 15 years old when the crime took place. Not older teenagers, not young adults, but children, still caught in the fragile stage between elementary and high school. Second, severity. These acts were not minor assaults or petty theft. They were killings, often marked by cruelty, premeditation, or a shocking disregard for human life. Each case pushed investigators, courts, and communities to ask how a child could hold such darkness. Third, impact. Some of these crimes forced changes in law, as in the case of Craig Price. Others drew nationwide headlines, shaking public trust in the very idea of childhood innocence. The level of attention they drew makes them part of America's cultural memory, studied in classrooms, debated in courts, and feared by parents. Finally, documentation. These cases were chosen because they are well recorded, with legal records, news archives, and credible sources to confirm the facts. In a subject this sensitive, accuracy is not optional. It is essential. So, as we proceed, remember, this is not a ranking to sensationalize. It is a journey through the darkest intersections of childhood and crime. And what lies ahead may be harder to accept than we expect. Craig Chandler Price was only 13 when he committed his first murder. It happened in Warwick, Rhode Island. In July 1987, the victim was Rebecca Spencer, a 27-year-old woman who lived just a few houses away from him. She was found stabbed more than 50 times. Her body left in her own home. For 2 years, the case went unsolved, with investigators struggling to imagine that a child could be capable of such brutality. But Craig's violence did not stop there. In September 1989, at the age of 15, he struck again. This time, the victims were Joan Heaton, a 39-year-old mother, and her 2 daughters, Jennifer, 10 years old, and Melissa, 7 years old. The crime scene was described as one of the most gruesome in Rhode Island history. Joan had been stabbed nearly 60 times. The children had suffered multiple stab wounds as well, and the ferocity shocked even seasoned detectives. What haunted investigators was not only the sheer savagery, but also Craig's age. At 15, he was already nearly 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed over 240 pounds. He was a teenager in years, but physically intimidating, and his strength magnified the horror of his crimes. When police finally identified him as the suspect, Craig confessed openly. He described the killings with chilling calmness, even mimicking the way the knife pierced flesh. Officers later said his lack of remorse was as frightening as the murders themselves. Because of Rhode Island law at the time, Craig could only be held until his 21st birthday. He was never formally tried for murder in adult court. This legal gap infuriated the public. Families of the victims demanded change, and lawmakers soon re-examined how juvenile offenders should be punished. Craig's case became the catalyst for reform, leading to stricter rules that allowed violent minors to be tried as adults in the future. Today, Craig Price remains incarcerated on additional charges related to assaults and weapons inside prison. He has never walked free as an adult, yet the memory of his crimes still lingers. A reminder that evil can wear the face of a child, and that society is sometimes unprepared for such darkness. The story of Craig Price forces us to confront unsettling questions. How does a boy of 13 develop the capacity to slaughter an entire family by 15? Was it born of his environment, or something innate within him? And most disturbing of all, could there be another child somewhere in America, already carrying the same shadow in silence, waiting to strike? In the summer of 1999, in Broward County, Florida, a boy named Lionel Tate committed a crime that would shock the nation. He was only 13 years old, tall and strong for his age, with an obsession for professional wrestling. On the night of July 28th, his mother's 12-year-old friend left her daughter, 6-year-old Tiffany Unick, in Lionel's care. Within hours, Tiffany was dead. According to Lionel's later statement, he had been imitating wrestling moves he had seen on television. But the autopsy told a different story. Tiffany's injuries were catastrophic: a fractured skull, a lacerated liver, and broken ribs. The force, medical experts said, was equivalent to a fall from a 3-story building or being struck by a speeding car. Forensic pathologists concluded the attack had lasted more than 5 minutes, and Tiffany had suffered at least 35 separate injuries. This was not a single careless accident. It was sustained, brutal violence. When investigators questioned Lionel, his answers were inconsistent. At times he said he was wrestling. Other times, he claimed Tiffany simply bumped her head. The jury, however, saw through his shifting story. In January 2001, Lionel Tate was convicted of first-degree murder, becoming the youngest American ever sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The decision drew outrage. Critics argued that Lionel, at 13, could not fully grasp the consequences of his actions. International human rights groups condemned the sentence as cruel and unusual punishment. After years of appeals, in 2004, his conviction was overturned on procedural grounds, and he accepted a plea deal that freed him under probation. But Lionel's story did not end with release. Within months, he was arrested again for armed robbery. Later, he faced more charges for assault and firearm possession. Each arrest painted a portrait of a young man unable to escape the cycle of violence that began in childhood. The case of Lionel Tate remains a troubling marker in American legal history. It forced courts to reconsider how children are prosecuted, and whether life without parole is ever appropriate for someone so young. Yet beyond the legal debates, the tragedy lies in the death of Tiffany Unick, a little girl whose life was cut short in the most violent of ways. And the haunting question lingers: was Lionel truly a child, imitating what he saw on television, or was that explanation merely a mask covering something far darker within? In the winter of 1958, America was gripped by fear. A young couple from Nebraska, Charles Starkweather and his 14-year-old girlfriend, Caril Ann Fugate, embarked on a killing spree that left 11 people dead across Nebraska and Wyoming. The case became one of the earliest modern examples of a media-fueled manhunt, capturing headlines nationwide. Caril was just 14 years old when she fell under Starkweather's influence. He was 19, a high school dropout with a fascination for James Dean's rebel image and a deep resentment towards society. When the pair met, Caril was still a schoolgirl, living with her mother, stepfather, and baby sister. Within months, she was drawn into a whirlwind of rebellion, romance, and ultimately, murder. On January 21st, 1958, the killings began. Starkweather shot Caril's stepfather and mother, then strangled her baby sister. Caril later claimed she had been held hostage, forced to go along out of fear. But prosecutors argued she had opportunities to escape and instead chose to remain by his side. Together, the couple traveled across rural Nebraska, invading homes, stealing cars, and killing anyone who got in their way. Their youngest victim was only 2 years old. The spree ended in Wyoming when police finally captured them after a dramatic chase. Starkweather confessed freely, portraying himself as the mastermind, while minimizing Caril's role. But the evidence suggested she was not a passive bystander. Witnesses recalled her threatening behavior, and survivors described her as cold and unflinching. At trial, Starkweather was sentenced to death in the electric chair, executed in 1959. Caril, however, was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, making her the youngest female in American history to receive such a sentence. After serving 17 years, she was paroled in 1976. To this day, debate continues. Was Caril Ann Fugate a victim, a frightened teenager manipulated by an older lover? Or was she a willing accomplice who embraced the thrill of violence? The question remains unresolved, lingering over one of America's darkest love stories. And it leaves us to wonder, how thin is the line between innocence and guilt when youth, love, and violence collide in the same chilling breath? In January 1999, the city of Cocoa, Florida, became the stage for a case that stunned the entire country. Curtis Jones, 12 years old, and his sister, Catherine, 13, carried out a murder that would make them the youngest children in America ever tried as adults for homicide. The siblings lived in a troubled household. Reports later revealed years of abuse, physical, emotional, and sexual. They claimed that their father's girlfriend, Sonia Spites, had mistreated them and ignored their pleas for help. Over time, resentment hardened into rage. One night, that rage turned lethal. On January 6th, the children lured Sonia into the house. Armed with their father's gun, they shot her, leaving her dead on the floor. For investigators, the shock was immediate. How could two children, barely into adolescence, coordinate and execute such a calculated act of violence? The prosecution argued that Curtis and Catherine had plotted the killing, discussing it in advance, and deciding on the weapon. The defense countered that they were victims themselves, trapped in a cycle of abuse with no adult intervention. The case presented the court with a painful dilemma. Should these children be treated as criminals or as casualties of a toxic environment? In the end, both were charged with second-degree murder, tried as adults. They accepted plea deals and were sentenced to 18 years in prison, followed by lifelong probation. They served their time quietly, eventually released in their late 20s. Their case left lasting scars on the legal system. It forced the nation to confront how far accountability should extend when children commit atrocities, especially when their own childhoods are marked by trauma. Were they killers in their own right, or desperate kids striking out against a world that had failed them? Curtis and Catherine Jones have since attempted to rebuild their lives, yet their names remain etched in the record books as the youngest convicted murderers in American history. And their story lingers with a haunting reminder. Sometimes the face of the perpetrator is not just a child. It is a child carrying wounds no one chose to see until it was too late. In the summer of 2024, a tragedy unfolded in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, that would once again test America's understanding of childhood and crime. James Campbell, only 13 years old, was accused of murdering his best friend, 10-year-old Hunter Myers, during what was supposed to be an ordinary sleepover. The boys had been close neighbors and playmates who shared video games, jokes, and schoolyard secrets. That night in August, Hunter's parents believed their son was safe in the company of a trusted friend. Instead, before dawn, they awoke to find police cars flashing outside their home and their child gone forever. Hunter had been stabbed multiple times. The brutality shocked the quiet community, where violent crime was rare and childhood friendships were sacred. Investigators quickly turned their attention to James. During questioning, he allegedly confessed, providing chilling details that suggested planning rather than accident. Prosecutors decided to charge James as an adult with first-degree murder, a choice that sparked fierce debate. At 13, could a boy truly comprehend the weight of such an act? Or did the cold facts of the case, the multiple stab wounds, the confession, the inconsistencies in his story, demand the harshest response from the law? The case garnered national media coverage. News anchors replayed images of the small suburban house, neighbors expressed disbelief, and commentators asked what could drive a child to kill his best friend. Some speculated about jealousy or simmering anger. Others suggested hidden psychological struggles, yet no clear motive was ever publicly confirmed. As of now, James Campbell remains in custody, awaiting trial. His future hangs in the balance, as lawyers argue over whether his case should stay in adult court or be returned to juvenile jurisdiction. Meanwhile, the Myers family mourns a boy described as bright, kind, and full of potential. What makes this case so unsettling is its immediacy. Unlike historical examples from decades past, this happened just yesterday. In our time, it forces parents to look at their children's friendships and ask unthinkable questions. Do we really know what lies in the hearts of the young? The story of James Campbell is not yet finished. The courts will decide his fate, but the tragedy has already left its mark. A child is dead, another stands accused, and a community is left grappling with grief and fear. And as the trial looms, one chilling thought lingers. If betrayal and violence can strike, even in the innocence of a sleepover, how many other hidden storms might be waiting behind the closed doors of childhood? The 5 cases we have examined remind us of a truth that is both terrifying and deeply uncomfortable. Childhood is not always a shield against darkness. From Craig Price's brutal murders in Rhode Island, to Lionel Tate's violent outburst in Florida, to Caril Ann Fugate, swept into a bloody spree, to Curtis and Catherine Jones, turning against their father's partner, and finally, James Campbell's betrayal of a friend. Each story reveals the fragile line where innocence collapses into atrocity. What connects these tragedies is not simply their youth, but the questions they force upon us. How should a justice system respond when the killer is a child? Should punishment reflect age or the severity of the crime? And what about society's role, the parents, the schools, the communities that either failed to notice or were powerless to intervene? In many of these cases, trauma, neglect, or toxic environments shaped young minds already vulnerable. In others, the motive is harder to grasp, leaving us with no clear explanation except the chilling reminder that violence can emerge even where we least expect it. As Americans, we want to believe in the innocence of childhood. We want to think of playgrounds, birthday parties, and bedtime stories, not knives, courts, and prison cells. Yet these cases force us to reckon with a harsher reality. Youth alone does not guarantee purity. So where do we go from here? Do we strengthen laws or focus on prevention and mental health? Do we lock children away or search for ways to heal them before violence takes root? There are no easy answers, only a call to look more closely, listen more carefully, and act more swiftly when warning signs appear. Because as these tragedies prove, the cost of silence can be measured in lives lost. And the most haunting thought of all, somewhere out there, another child may already be standing on the edge, waiting for the moment when shadow turns into blood.